Hello, friends. If you have been following, I'm doing this series. This is the third part on how to speak your mind lovingly in a Filipino relationship, whether it's with your mom, maybe with your partner, and why this is important. The nuance in the culture. It's more pragmatic way of speaking. It's understanding someone's resistance first, rather than you speak based on just what you think needs to be expressed. It is considering how ready the person is. And for those of you who may be a little impatient, I understand. It's a little going around the bush, in which I hope you choose to be more effective than right. So, as you know, Filipinos are more relational. They're less task oriented. So if you are new in a potluck, for instance, they might ask you a question. But the question, if you just observe, they may not, I'm talking about an immigrant Filipino, they may not be as concerned as to the response. Of course, if the response is juicy, that's like chismis. Most people enjoy the chismis part. And they'll piggyback on that because their goal is to get to the juicy part. And so they might ask questions that are, you might think, oh, that's not very well thought out. It's not so reflective, because they're really not trying to be reflective. They're really just trying to warm you up and see, is this person a part of our in group or not? Ibang tao or hindi ibang tao, as we say. When American culture, the Western culture is more task oriented. So there is a going back and forth, usually one at a time. If you ask a child, what is your name, or tell me about your day, there's usually a spacing, a going back and forth between the parent and the child. Unlike with some other cultures, there might be, if you've been in a potluck, Filipino potluck, 10 different topics, and you're able to close out at least most of the topics by the time you say goodbye. And so it's a really different type of communication. So today I'm going to be talking about tender startups. It is by the language of tender startup, or that concept, is from John Gottman, who is a psychologist, primarily working with couples. And he believes that the way we start our conversation usually gives us a vibe of how it would end. And that makes sense. So when you start the conversation, it's very crucial to know um, how, and your tone, how you will be starting. So let me just give you an example. So let me just break it down to just three different ways of how you could do a tender startup. First is to think about the other person's potential. Even if they're not there yet, they're not doing it, you're talking as if you believe in their potential. The second one is what we call pasintabi, meaning you understand, that's a Filipino connotation. Pasintabi is like almost like you're saying, excuse me, you didn't know this information, that sort of thing. I'll give you more example. The third one is you are aware of the person's resistance. And you might know that by history, by other people's kind of feedback about that person. But let me just go back. In using the tender startup, if you're thinking about potential, so if you want somebody to do their dishes and they haven't done it yet, a tender startup is what you say to start the conversation. Is you will say, I know you're about to do this. But when you get to washing the dishes, I want you to actually also wipe off the counter. So it's based on potential that you're already thinking about, that even though you know they're not doing it yet, it doesn't matter if you're irritated, but it's a different type of language. I know you're about to do this. And imagine as a person, if somebody talks to you in
Next
that
one,
way. Another example is, I trust that you will do this. So very similar, very in the same vibe. The second one is pasintabi. It's almost like they didn't know something, and you're going to just set them aside to tell them a little bit more information because you give them the benefit of the doubt that they don't know. So you might start off, you may not know this. Okay, so that's another one. Or to be honest, and you're giving them a honest, a sincere information, and giving them space to maybe they're not um, acting in a certain way that is the best or the welfare of the family, for instance, but you're giving them a little bit more information, trusting that if they knew that information they probably would think differently. um in Tagalog we would say sa totoo lang. Okay, so that's a pasintabi. The third example is that if you know that someone is very aware of their resistance, they're not open, you could say, I know you might think that I don't care about you, for instance. So you're going to read potentially what their resistance is. So I know you're worried about, you know, um, I know you might think this. And if you hit that in the nail, it really takes preparation to not just barge in, and it's almost like you just want to give the person a piece of your mind. And sometimes there might be occasions where you'll be satisfied doing that. But to sustain relationships, and relationships are, they're not like, like when you iron clothing and it's just like wrinkle free. Relationships can be messy because humans are the way that they are. But I think that the deepest relationships are one that gets messy, but then we could also recover and reconnect again. So anyway, I want to invite you, if you are not yet on my newsletter. I do this almost every week, in which you don't have to find any of my YouTubes or my articles. Instead, I find you through your inbox. So if you're interested, I invite you. I'll put the link below. Just join the newsletter. And also, I'll be opening a room I call Muni Muni Room. Muni Muni is one of my most favorite Filipino word, which means it's like dream escaping, dream making. It's not just dreaming because for nothing, which is also a reasonable purpose for dreaming, but it's dreaming. It's like dream escape. So you could connect to the deepest recesses of your soul. If you're interested, I will be doing some classes. Just be in the on the lookout by being in the joining the newsletter. I'll see you there. Marami pong salamat sa pakikinig. This is Roanne Samos, licensed psychotherapist in California. Ingat po.